So today I'm going to talk about how to basically go global without a global budget. And this, I think, is a challenge that we're all facing because building a brand's expensive. And we all know in the modern world of marketing that it's more critical than ever. As Google and Facebook control more and more of the funnel, as it becomes harder to kind of track people with GDPR and cookie laws and things like that, we know that the way to future-proof our brand means that we're not going to be subject to the changes of the wind, and suddenly a big update on Google PPC is going to really stymie our marketing strategy. We know that the way to kind of future-proof that is to build a brand. But most of us think and know that this is hard and expensive. And we take our cues from the big companies that are doing huge, big ad campaigns and think, I wish I could do something like that because that's the way to build a brand. But I think things are changing and that there is a new way to build a brand in a way that delivers lasting return and is achievable by a small business. And that's what I'm going to talk you through today. So the challenges that we have been particularly exacerbated over the last year. With COVID going on, we've obviously got no in-person conferences. We could be at a conference now having this conversation, but instead we are basically just here on a little webinar together, which is a shame. There's no in-store experiences. People are not going into shops and having that experience that you can build a great kind of branded experience from there. That's not happening. There's no room for long-form advertising in cinema or at sporting events or any other big live events. There's less outdoor media exposure because people aren't traveling as much. There's limited press opportunities. There's like 2 narratives, COVID, and then until recently the US presidential election, nothing else going on. So it's very hard to kind of build your brand through opportunistic PR. And of course, because of this, there's way more competition on social media because everybody's trying to create more content and compete for eyes in that regard. So it's just become super, super hard. And a lot of us are sitting there thinking, well, what can we do to stand out, to build a brand when we can't do any of the things that we normally would choose to do? And we'll see things like this ad that Disney brought out this week, which is a beautiful ad, created by Disney. And we look at it and go, wow, that's amazing. That's the way we have to build a brand. We have to create this stunning, amazing piece of filmmaking. And it has to go viral. It has to reach all these people and be shared on all these different social media platforms. And that's where we're going to build a brand. And we have to do it for under $10,000. And of course, we don't have access to the best filmmakers in the world, and we're not going to be able to do this. So what you find is a lot of brands, knowing a lot of companies, small businesses, knowing that they need to build a brand, will try and replicate the strategies of these big companies, invest in a big ad campaign, spend loads of money on distribution, and then realize that nothing happens. And that they've spent a huge amount of money on branding that hasn't really made a tangible difference. And this is a huge problem. So we'll have CMOs saying, let's invest in a viral advertising campaign. That's where we're going to build a brand. And we'll probably then go and speak to an agency somewhere in Brooklyn or in London or wherever you happen to be, get a creative agency to do a great big pitch, spend a good amount of your budget on your production, and then spend the most of your money on distribution. And really the goal becomes, let's try and get our content out to as many people as possible. We'll just, put our media spend on the most effective channels based on cost per impression, cost per view. We'll spend on YouTube, on Facebook, and all these things, and we'll distribute to all these different channels and really hope that through heavy distribution spend, we can kickstart sharing that will hopefully get our content to go viral, and then that will build up a brand awareness, and then we'll all be rich and retire happily ever after, and everything will be good. And it just doesn't work like that. What we'll probably find is that our media agency will give us a report that looks like this. It tells us here are the number of impressions, here are the number of views we've got, here's the cost, here's how much it all played out for us, and here's the results on our particular media spend. And we'll go, okay, is that good? Does that mean anything? And they'll tell us it's really good because they're incentivized to spend money because they capture revenue based on a percentage of our overall spend. So the advice is always, just spend more on distribution, just spend more on distribution. And it will ultimately then, if you're a bit more sophisticated, be measured on things like applause and conversation amplification, which is basically a fancy way of saying the number of likes, the number of comments, and the number of shares. But again, this doesn't really tell us a story because going viral doesn't necessarily mean that you've had success. If somebody says something like, we saw a 35% increase in brand amplification rate, often that actually, when you drill down, it just means that you had a few more shares than you did last year. And this kind of focus on, basically just trying to increase exposure and increase distribution on social media, we assume, and I think wrongly, that this correlates with improved brand marketing success. This correlates with salience and preference. And there really is no evidence at all that it does. We're just relied on this old model because we think that's all we can do, and we think that's all that works. So there's a $60 billion industry based up on what is essentially a foundational lie that just spending lots of money on advertising will increase your brand awareness and thereby increase your brand preference. It doesn't kind of work that way. Going viral does not necessarily grow your brand. In fact, often going viral can just build a story, and that particular content can go viral, and then your brand will be utterly irrelevant to the story. But you are capturing all these metrics that tells you that your brand is doing really, really well. And in reality, it isn't, because the story is probably not about you. It's about something else, or about something that happened that you're just jumping on. And the real sad and challenging truth that we need to accept, particularly as marketers for smaller businesses who are trying to make brand marketing work, but don't have access to the Disneys who can just spend their way through any problem, is that the number of impressions is not the number of people impressed. And we need to think more creatively about actually impressing people. So the problem with relying on digital advertising as our bulwark for all of our brand marketing, particularly in a world when we can't do any of the other things that we might do, like press and events, is that you only have a few seconds to stand out with digital advertising before somebody skips away and moves. And it's very, very hard to stand out. It's very hard to create love, to get somebody to really like you just through an ad. It happens very, very rarely, and we all build our strategies based on the exception rather than the rule. And interrupting people may do more harm than good, but we don't really have the means and the ability to understand and know this. So we've got to come up with something different than just throwing money at advertising. And this is where it gets challenging, and this is where I would like to propose to you a new way of doing things. And the first thing is a different kind of content marketing. So instead of investing a huge amount of money in ads, doing something different. So received wisdom in the marketing world has always been that shorter videos are better for marketing. If you go and read any post about the ideal length of a video, it's going to tell you that the shorter videos are better. And really the reason why it says this is that short form is the format that was created by social media companies. And the reason it was created by social media companies is it's a format that they can sell ads with. So we have basically just built the format that we are trying to use for content marketing based on what giant advertising conglomerates would like us to use, not because it necessarily resonates better with audiences. In fact, if we think about the stuff that we're watching day to day, loads of us will sit down and watch Netflix, we'll watch long things on YouTube, we might watch a short video here and there. There's no reason why short video has become dominant, except that that is the product that is being sold by Facebook, Google, and all the other big players. So there is no real truth to this. And we found this at Wistia very acutely, this problem, when we decided in 2017 that we really needed to improve our brand awareness as a small company. And we spent $2 million on a big old distribution for this ad campaign that had kind of funny faces, and it was about being more creative with your business and using whatever small resources you have to be more creative. And we were quite pleased with it. We thought it was going to go really well, and the results were basically nothing. It ended up getting us about as much more traffic as a medium performing blog post would have done. So we knew this was a problem, and we just fallen into the trap of doing everything that advertising agencies and received wisdom told us we should do. But then a year later, we had a conference, and after a few beers, Chris Savage, the CEO of Wistia, had a chat with Adam Lee Segor, pictured here, who is the CEO of a company called Sandwich Video. And after a few beers, decided, wouldn't it be a nice idea to create 3 different ads to really show, well, how expensive does ad production really need to be? And what's the difference when you spend different amounts of money on production? So we did one for $1,000 shot with an iPhone, one for $10,000 shot with a Canon C300 cinema camera, and one for $100,000 shot with an Amiri Mira, a high-end cinema camera. And we've done a report if you'd like to see the results on that particular example. But what we really found through this process was the actual process was really interesting, So we decided to document it, and we decided to document the entire process such that we could then work out and determine how sort of good things went, and we could create content that would be really interesting for our audiences in terms of longer form media. And this happened basically purely by accident, but ended up being something that we created. And we made something called the 1-10-100, which was a documentary that's about an hour and a half long about this process that we went through. And this really flew for us. This really took off. And we ended up winning a Webby Award for it, for Best Original Series, up against big players like Uber and Lego and Google, and little old Wistia, a company of fewer than 100 people. So we realized that something was going well, and we tried to reverse engineer it. And the thing that we really understood was that what we'd seen was that our brand metrics were up a great deal with this, and it was going very well. But actually, the metrics that we set ourselves weren't so successful. And we understood that really what we'd achieved through this was not brand awareness, but it was something else. It was brand affinity. It was that people had spent a great deal of time with the content because it was longer, and they'd then grown to build a relationship with Wistia through that length in a way that we would never have been able to achieve with a longer, with a shorter piece of content. And so in order to really achieve what I think is more important, and what we're ultimately trying to achieve when we talk about brand awareness, is getting people to really like us and getting people to have brand preference and want to choose us above others and talk to us. So what we then did is had to think, well, okay, how can we engage and do something a bit better? And the way in which we started thinking about this was actually what we're doing is content not for brand awareness, but for brand affinity. And this was the content that was really creating value for us. So the new kind of content marketing I'd like to propose is, instead of just doing lots of short form video, create a show. Create something really long, and we're calling this process brand affinity marketing, and stop thinking about trying to get lots and lots of very quick interactions with lots of people, but really in-depth interactions from fewer people. So really in-depth interactions, because that's the kind of thing that's going to really build up that relationship with your target audience over time. Create a show. So this basically means, instead of doing short form advertorial, which is, pushing something in front of people that they need to consume very quickly and is simple and easy to understand, do something that is more in depth, so that that people have to actively choose to watch, that requires that investment and is in depth and detailed. Because through that process, people are going to start to build the relationship with you that forms the crux of that connection that then has all the benefits that we think about with brand marketing. So people are advocating for you. They are choosing you over others. They are promoting your brand to everyone. They are searching for you. And the thing to really bear in mind here is that you as a business have permission to tell great stories. And we know that we know this instinctively, that businesses are not just about what they sell. They're about who they are and what they do, and what their essence is as a company, as a group of people, what their purpose is. And often when we talk about brand purpose, we then often see it just expressed in a few forms, through the design, through some of the corporate social responsibility work, and maybe through the ads. But I think actually the most effective way to do this is through longer form storytelling. And we're seeing companies do this, like two Wistia customers here, MailChimp and Price Intelligently, both SaaS companies who sell software, but have created stories around what their purpose is and what they understand. So if you're a business saying, well, okay, I get the idea, we could do like a show, a longer form piece of content, but what should we create? The piece of advice I'd have for you is go and find your nerds. So work out who your most active, most excited customers are, who they are, and work out the thing on the internet that would really serve them and nobody else is making. Find that really specific thing that relates to your expertise internally that you can then create for others and start to tell great stories, because that's the kind of thing that's really going to resonate with consumers of all stripes, and B2B as well as B2C. So really think about going really niche, really specific, something that would never be made by a TV company. So Netflix is never going to produce this, but something really specific that would really matter to your audience specifically. And think about going and creating that show for them. And if you do that, you will build that relationship, you'll build that brand affinity. It's going to stand you in good stead. And it doesn't mean you have to spend a fortune on content distribution. You just need to spend a small amount of money creating the right thing. And the most important part there is working out the right thing to create. So once you've committed to making a show, to doing this new form of content marketing, you then need to think about measuring it differently. The problem that we have with brand marketing right now, and the problem that the big brands don't have to worry because they can just outspend all their problems, that we're often measuring things like impressions, and we're measuring things like views, and we're measuring things like prompted recall surveys, which don't really mean a lot unless you're a huge company just jostling for position with others. So you need to think about new metrics to measure. And again, we discovered the right answer to this at Wistia by accident. So when we built our documentary, we set a metric for success that we thought would be a sensible, practical metric. So we set the number of engaged views. So the number of people who would watch, say, more than 25% of the video. And we said, okay, well, we want to get 100,000 of those people. And unfortunately, in reality, we did not get that. We didn't hit the result. We only had 31,000 people watching the content. So we thought, well, we've really failed there. And yet instinctively, we knew we kind of hadn't, because we had a huge buzz, a lot of conversation around the content we created. We won our Webby Award. It was really going well. Like it was hard, apart from the metrics we'd set ourselves, to say that this wasn't good. And most importantly, we saw that our brand search was up 11%. So a big increase month over month in terms of the amount of people searching for Wistia. And this was, I think, a key indication that, well, we're clearly doing something right. But the problem wasn't that we were doing anything wrong. It was that we'd chosen to measure the wrong thing. And what matters is not the number of views. What really matters for this kind of content is the depth of the interaction. And the best metric to kind of measure that on aggregate is time spent. And if we look at the amount of time spent for our content here, what we can see is that the blog content that we made in that same year, 2018, was, people spent about 8,000 hours in total with that content, which was over 1,000 posts. Whereas the 4 videos that we invested in this long form content had an even greater time spent. So it was a small amount of content and a relatively small number of viewers, but each viewer was spending a great deal of time with the content and having a very deep interaction. And that was cementing and building that brand affinity, which was driving up our brand search, which was increasing the number of customers. So the key metric for success with brand marketing is not the number of interactions, but the amount of time spent. And we can see this, that a 30-minute interaction with 3,000 people, if we look back to our campaign in 2017, did more for brand performance as measured by sales, as measured by brand search, than did a 3-second interaction with 43 million people. And it just shows that really what you do not need is reach. Actually, what you need is depth of interaction. And that's the key thing to prioritize in brand marketing. So the way in which you can simply measure this is just to think about brand marketing as a different category of video, a different category of content. So we're not going to sort of abandon everything that we're doing elsewhere. We might be doing product videos, and product videos are going to be very effectively measured in terms of things like assisted conversions. Here we see a product video that had a lot of assisted conversions, but not so many views. And if we look at the social media video that we made, which is something about how to collaborate remotely on a video shoot for Facebook and YouTube, this particular video did well in terms of reach, got us a lot of views, but people didn't spend much time with it. Whereas the brand marketing video, this longer form show that we made, the key metric where that excels, it doesn't look that good if we're just measuring assisted conversions and engaged views. But if we start to measure time spent, that's where we see that the real value is being built. So measure resonance, not reach. And additionally, think about the amount of if you're going to track the number of interactions, think about it in terms of tracking the depth of interaction per person. So by that, I mean tracking the number of fans. So practically speaking, this means looking at how much each particular individual viewer is engaging. So instead of just measuring the number of overall views, you want to say, well, how many of those views were like from the same person? And then how many of that can we roll up to say that person's a fan? So you want to set like a benchmark to say, okay, well, if somebody has watched 75% of 4 videos and they have 30 minutes of viewing in total under the belt, we might consider them a fan. And if they've also given us their email address. So we can set up our marketing automation or our CRM to kind of categorize and say, here are our fans. And what we want to then track numerically is over time, the amount of time spent with our brand going up and the number of fans going up. And that's really the metric that's going to prove and help you build that brand over long term. And what you want to see is your number of fans steadily increasing. And then you should start to see return on investment in terms of sales, in terms of word of mouth, in terms of brand search, and everything else that we kind of think of as more loosely the ultimate goals of brand marketing. Okay, lastly, you also need to think about a fresh approach to distribution. So different metrics, different kind of content, and also distributing it differently. So the way in which we distribute ads is basically we just outsource everything to Google and Facebook. We give them money, they put the content up on their platforms where we've allowed our brands to live, and we have given them a platform and said they can kind of own all of our channels, and we just rent our audience from them. And then we basically pay them to have access to our audience and other people who we think are a bit like our audience, and hope for the best. But this is like building a house on rented land. It's a real problem, because the moment that Google and Facebook decide to change their pricing or the way they choose their access, you are scuppered, and you have allowed them to basically control and own your audience. And you are paying a privilege every time you want to access them. So over time, you're just spending more and more and more money, and that brand marketing flywheel doesn't exist, because at each stage you're just having to spend more and more. And this may not be a problem if you're a huge business that can afford to throw money, but small businesses who don't have a global budget cannot do this. So we need to think differently about content distribution. And there is a model which does work, and it is the model of Netflix. So what Netflix have done with their content is they have built a platform that has the content on it, but they still use social media, and they use social media to not distribute the content in total, but just to distribute clips and trailers of the content. So they are using social media as snippets, as bits of content to put it out there and entice people and interact them, and use social media for what it's good at, which is reach. To put trailers and clips out there that people are going to watch, and then they try and use social media to drive people back to their own platform, where obviously they then capture subscribers, and for Netflix, because they are making money through that process, to capture revenue as well. And you can do exactly the same thing. You can market like a media company. You can think about the fact that if you are going to be building a show, you should host this on a platform that you control, and you should market as if you are a media company, whereby you use all the benefits and all the wonderful things that social media can provide you in terms of reach, but you don't make that your home. You do not put all your content and all your best things there. You drive people to your website or an app or something that you control, where you can then track everything properly. You can bring your audience into your CRM, and you can start to measure success based on the metrics that you would like, not on the metrics that Google and Facebook are providing you, which are based upon ad performance rather than based upon actual brand engagement. So think about marketing like a media company. And that means thinking about not content distribution per se, but audience development. You are trying to build an audience. You are trying to build an audience that you control, that you own, because over time, through building those fans and bringing them into your ecosystem, so capturing email addresses rather than just YouTube and Facebook subscribers, you can then remarket to people effectively when you have that access to them. You can engage with them one-on-one, and you can tell stories directly. And through that process, you're going to build up that fan base that you control. And no matter what happens in any big change in the marketing world, you are going to be sorted and able to react to that most effectively. And this is what we're now doing at Wistia. We have a big tab on our top nav bar that says original series, and within this we have podcasts, we have videos, we have movies, and all the long form brand marketing content that we're creating. And over time, we're really building this library of content people can interact with, and they can start to come to us and see us as a specific niche publisher. And that's exactly how we are building our brand and seeing increasing brand success. So make sure that when you're doing this, you then include a subscription function, because through asking people to subscribe to your long form content on your website via email rather than on YouTube via a click button means that you can email them, you can directly access them, and you can measure how they're watching and therefore start to track the engagement with fans. YouTube and Facebook and all these other platforms don't give you that level of granular detail. So you need to build something that you have that specific control over. And that's what we need to go after. Because if you own the distribution channel, you own the audience data. And if you own the audience data, then you own the audience and you control the full experience, and you have then future-proofed your marketing strategy. So your new brand marketing strategy, instead of just spending good money after bad on ads and trying to become the next Disney or the next Red Bull, which is incredibly difficult to do, you're going to create long-form niche entertainment, so a show for the nerdiest, most specific, best customers that you have, and build the best thing on the internet for them. Because if you make it great for them and make it for one person who really loves you, you'll find all these other people who really love you come out of the woodwork and start consuming your content as well. You are going to measure the time spent watching that content and the number of fans that you acquire, so people who have subscribed and are regularly watching your content. And your distribution is going to be about owning your audience. You're going to market like a media company and drive people from social media back to your website where they can then watch all that content in full. And if you follow these steps and you do them effectively, you will build a lasting global brand that will stand out and be beneficial for the long run, no matter whether you're a small business, a big business, or a medium-sized business. It's all about doing it relative to your size, your scale, and your audience. So I hope that is a useful run through of the vision of how we think brand marketing is going and exactly what you should be doing. Thank you very much.
To see if we had any questions that came in. That was overall super helpful. One question I had for you was, how exactly did you end up into this sort of brand video niche, if you will?
Me personally,
you personally.
or Wistia? Me personally. So I originally worked in film and theatre, and then I ended up working for a marketing agency doing SEO, and from there kind of started to understand that base level technical marketing, and then started to work for a while with some agencies doing big ad campaigns, and I've sort of sat across all different sides of the production and the advertising and the kind of more technical marketing. So I've kind of just got that very broad knowledge, and I've been able to see, I think, the challenges that go on in the middle, and have sort of built a little brand and business there. But it's mostly just the accident of following my curiosity at various points in my career. So that's me.
Opportunities you see for 2021. Obviously, we know 2020 was a challenge for everyone across the board. So what do you see that could be a silver lining of 2021?
Goodness, the silver lining of 2021. I mean, a lot's going to depend on what happens in the next few months, but there's certainly going to be great opportunity for more original content. So think about doing this and start investing. If you can get off the mark and move now, you're going to be ahead of the game when other people come to it in a couple of years' time. So now's a good time to start thinking about investing in that longer form storytelling. End of 21, we should have some events again, and that's going to be, great, because people will love congregating, and that strikes me as a great marketing opportunity again, that we might see some benefits investing in conferences and things like that. I think this is the big opportunity for the next couple of years. The other thing is like podcasting. Podcasting is not overdone. It really isn't. Very few people have actually done it. If you can do a good brand podcast that has its own unique value proposition. So don't think about just going, oh, my business has a podcast. Like, come up with something specific and different and focused. And if it's something that really appeals to people kind of instinctively, then you're going to really start to build up this benefit as well. So think about start creating stuff. But my general idea and suggestion would be, stop thinking about where you can position and place yourself in terms of advertorial and partnerships, and start thinking about what you can create and what stories you can tell, because that's where the long-term value and opportunity is going to be.
A couple questions we have for you. Can you clarify, did you say your blog posts outperformed your 4 videos, or did I misread that?
The videos outperform the blog post in terms of time spent. Yeah. So the amount of, if we measure the amount of time on page versus with the number of viewers over time, the blog post contributed less than did the videos in terms of the amount of actual time spent over that year, 2018. So the 4 videos contributed more in terms of brand engagement than did the blog posts for us, even though the blog posts were a significantly more investment. There was every blog post we'd ever made. So it was like 1,100 blog posts versus 4 videos, and the videos.
Any advice you might have for brands trying to start podcasts on Wistia?
So my main advice is the most important thing is you need that value proposition. You need that focused idea. Like the key, you should spend far more time than most businesses do coming up with the idea of what your podcast is. If you say we are doing a brand podcast, you've already failed. Like you need to really have focus. Okay, well, what is this podcast? It needs its own sub-brand, its own identity, and its own idea. And you should be rigorously disciplined about coming up with new ideas, interrogating them, breaking them down, working out whether they're going to resonate before you settle on one. So it's very easy to say we're going to do a podcast, But the really hard thing, and the thing that makes all the difference, is coming up with that really good idea for a podcast. So, and the way you get there is by understanding your audience. So work out who you're making it for, work out what they care about, and then start to come up with a format and an idea that's really going to work for that podcast. But it has to have its own brand, basically. So I would spend a great deal of time coming up with lots of ideas, throwing them out, working on them more, and really interrogating to work out what the right idea is for you. And that's the part that I think most businesses fall down on. So my advice would be, really plan and think about that creative strategy in a very deep way.
Maybe just one more question, just for the budget wise, how would you say you would be able to differentiate between, let's say, your department growth and then how much, you focus on your brand itself?
Sorry, could you repeat that? It just cut out a bit for me then.
To differentiate for your budget, how much would that go for, let's say internally, compared to how much it would go for your brand?
So I think it all depends on what you're able to do internally and how much you want to outsource. The key thing is you can't really outsource that, like coming up with your audience and working out what they care about. You need to sort of really work on that internally. So there's a lot of work in terms of that. You can then obviously outsource the media distribution. So, spending money on clips and trailers as ads. You can outsource some of the production. So it really depends on what your particular situation is and what you really need to spend on to be successful. So I don't know that I have a blanket particular idea of that. It depends a lot on what creative resource you have in-house.
One more question from Patrick. He said, how did you promote/distribute the videos you created?
Sure. So our email list was one. Obviously, that's our initial point of call. We did a big email blast. We did a lot of we cut up the long videos to create these little clips and trailers that we then used on social media and we used on advertising platforms. So we used advertising, but we didn't use advertising to just throw the video out there. It was all to entice people to come to our website. So we used advertising quite strategically there, and it was very cheap because we're basically using ads as, instead of like advertising something that people don't want to see, we're just like giving them a little clip of a fun clip, and that works particularly well on like Facebook. You probably all see as you're scrolling through these little clips and TV shows that get cut up. It's just exactly that. So we just basically used the social media channels for what they're good at and most effective to distribute clips and trailers. So we did a lot of that. We did some PR. We did some a little bit of influencer marketing and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a kind of broad spread of your typical marketing strategies that you would use to promote a product, and we just applied that to the media asset that we had. So it was basically like launching the show as if it was a product.
And two more questions. Your thoughts on working versus non-working dollars?
I am afraid I don't know what that means. I've never heard that term before. Working versus non-working. That might have passed me by. So if you ever ask that to follow up with a bit more detail,
I think it's just the difference is non-working is kind of the time spent for your content creation. So you're not actually getting all that published out there. And then the working dollars would definitely be the time spent publishing it out there, all the content that's been created already. So I don't know if that clarifies the question.
Not so much for me. I'm sorry. No, I'm not sure I quite understand that one. So do you mean sort of money spent on production versus distribution?
Not time spent. My bad.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I would spend more on production generally than distribution. So maybe it kind of depends, but there hits a ceiling where you're going to like not get significantly more value for your distribution spend. So you need to think about where it's going to be most effective, and that's a balancing act dependent on the size of your audience, the size of your budget, and you know, there hits a threshold where you've spent enough to kind of make it work in production, and then you can put it on distribution. So it's hard to know, but I would generally say like you probably want to think about like maybe 50-60% of the money being on the creative, and then if the creative is good enough and it works and you've cut it up and you've made the right things, the distribution will be a lot easier because you don't need a lot of spend to make something work when you have a great asset and you have a good bit of content, because people will then share it and it will fly. So maybe 60-40. If you've got like 100 grand as your total budget, then yeah, I'd probably spend about $60,000 on creation, 40,000 distribution, something like that.
How much was spent on video versus marketing the videos, expressed as a percentage?
How much for us in total? Yeah, I think it was something like that for us. So our entire spend on creation was we spent 118,000 on the ads, and then I don't know, we don't have a precise figure for the actual creation of the documentary because we did it ourselves, and we filmed it ourselves. But it was probably, if you were to in terms of like raw spend, maybe it was another $80,000. But we have a great internal team, and if you were outsourcing that, you'd have to pay a lot more. So let's say, for the sake of argument, we spent something like 200 grand on production, another 150 on distribution, something like that. But it was certainly a lot cheaper than other campaigns we've done. Yeah. But it's not cheap. I mean, that's an expensive bit of content marketing, but it's not without the reach of a smallish company. And there's a lot of businesses spending that a year on PPC, no question, Definitely. And not getting the same return we do.
Yeah, that makes sense. We'll give it another 10 seconds. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
I would just say, like, we've done things since for much smaller budgets. So we've made stuff internally recently for just a few tens of thousands of dollars and distributed it similarly with relatively small budgets, and it's worked just as effectively. So you don't need to spend that much. You can do it for, you can create a show for 20 grand and distribute it for 10. It's not beyond the realms. You just have to be creative and thoughtful about what you make.
Going to be a huge, it's already trending a lot more, and like what you said with the eye-catching aspect of love at first sight. I think that's definitely a big thing with attention spans and just the visual aspect of it, for sure. All right, well, I think we can end it early. I don't know if there's any more questions, but thank you, Phil. That was really helpful. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I hope we have you back soon. About Wistia, I think it's a great platform to use. Snapwire on our end, we love it. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.